stage, here's what we've got. We've got Phillip Rivers not returning to the Chargers. ESPN created this prediction machine where dominoes fall. If X happens, then Y happens. That includes a scenario of Bridgewater coming back to the Vikings, which we have to talk about because that's extremely reckless speculation. We've also got Dom Capers, now works for the Vikings, which just came out. And I don't know which one of these things to start with. So how about you decide which one of these three things that are going on at this very moment that we should start with?
Well, let's start off what we know, which is that Phillip Rivers is not going to be a Los Angeles Charger any longer. And it sounds like he wants to play more football last year. This is not like Eli with the New York Giants. So I imagine there'll be a team looking for an upgrade at that position, even if it's just for one, possibly 2 seasons, that says, hey, we'd like to have that veteran. Maybe it's a situation where they know they're starting over at quarterback, and they're going to draft somebody, but they want a veteran like Rivers to sort of lead the young guy. But that's what we do know is that Phillip Rivers will not be a Charger next year. He will be, seems like, somewhere else, not retiring. And that might start this sort of domino thing that, I don't know, maybe the Vikings are involved in, but speculation is what it is, but I sort of feel like the Vikings will not be involved in whatever this quarterback carousel that's going to occur this season.
So I totally agree. And later on the show today, Derek Klassen, who studies quarterbacks for Football Outsiders, is going to come on and talk about Jalen Hurts because the more likely scenario for the Vikings in terms of adding a quarterback, if they do, would be somebody in the second or third round to develop and see what they have and then make a decision, or that they just sign Cousins to a contract extension. But the Phillip Rivers thing leads me to the prediction machine from ESPN because they've got 3 teams that Rivers could possibly go to: the Bucs, the Colts, and the Carolina Panthers. And if you click on Colts and scroll down, what you see is a scenario in which the Vikings could trade Kirk Cousins to Los Angeles and then sign Teddy Bridgewater back. Now, let me try to make this work.
With that, to imagine that Teddy's going to be back with the Vikings, I think probably excites a lot of people, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around, like, is somebody else going to go give up capital, like draft capital, right, or players for Kirk Cousins and then also take on that salary? Like, that's the part of the equation that I don't know how that one adds up.
I totally agree. And I put this under the 0.05% category, but I would have also put Brett Favre coming to the Vikings as 0.05%. So the fact that Brett Favre came here makes everything on the table to talk about.
I don't see that. I actually saw of course I was a part of it, but when there was first rumors, Brett Favre is trying to get out of this Jets deal and, where could he end up or whatever. And, of course the Vikings was immediately thrown out there.
Yeah.
Obviously the relationship with Darrell Bevell, who had been his quarterback's coach in Green Bay, he knew the offense, he could sort of step in. It was a team that had Super Bowl talent, and guys like Favre, at the end of her careers, they're not just going to go play for some crappy team. And right. So to me, it wasn't 0.5 with Brett like that. Once it happened, it made so much sense that, that's what, trading Kirk Cousins and somebody offering. I don't know how it would all pan out.
So I think from what I'm referring to is just the big picture of a guy who was a legendary quarterback for the Green Bay Packers someday ending up with the Vikings to end his career and taking him to the NFC Championship is just so improbable to anybody who would have grown up watching Brett Favre, that it opens the door to, with this organization, anything can happen. Randall Cunningham coming out of retirement, he was running a sheetrock company or something, and then he comes out of retirement. They're in the NFC Championship with one of the great offenses ever. It just unpredictable stuff happens with this team all the time. So the door is open. To your point, unlikely is an understatement for Kirk Cousins getting traded and Teddy Bridgewater coming back here. But I'll just explain the one scenario in which it could happen would be if Kirk and his representation got with the Vikings and they said, okay, here's what we're thinking. What are you thinking? And the Vikings said, we're thinking that you should take a lot less than what you guys are asking for. And then Kirk says, no, I'm going to hit the free agent market again. So, okay, that Kirk is only in through 2020. Do you want the lame duck quarterback Or could you move him to a team that's desperate for a big splash now that Rivers isn't going to play in Los Angeles, new stadium? They have zero buzz in Los Angeles about that Chargers team. Like absolutely 0.0 people are interested there in Los Angeles. Try to create some sort of buzz. And then if the Vikings, run by, largely Mike Zimmer, who loves Teddy Bridgewater, thought, we need a more dynamic quarterback to win, this is our only chance to bring Teddy back now that we know that his knee actually works. That's the only way I can make this scenario work, Sage. But aside from that, it goes under the supremely unlikely scenario.
Supremely, and the only way Teddy Bridgewater comes back is if Kirk Cousins is not back, and I just see Kirk Cousins is back. Whether he has an extension or not, excuse me, I don't know. But I see him back as on basically a 1-year fully guaranteed contract, and I also see the Vikings going, we think we have to upgrade. Like this is, long term for the next, 10 years or whatever it might be. We got to find that quarterback of the future, and I don't know if they believe Kirk is that guy or not, but it doesn't seem to me that he brings a whole another level of football that we're seeing out of these other quarterbacks that were in the playoffs this season. And the Vikings are a good football team, but they don't have as much talent as San Francisco, so they can't really get by with having just sort of that average style of quarterback, I guess, in a lot of ways. So we'll see what happens. I just don't know how they move on from Kirk this year. I don't know who. It's weird to say, but it sounds like Kyle Shanahan just loves, and that staff loves Kirk Cousins. Like they really think really, really high of him. I mean, if they would trade Jimmy Garoppolo for Kirk Cousins, I think I'd have some interest in that. I like the way Garoppolo plays football. He has some clutch in him. He's got a super quick release. He does a lot of really good things. And so, who knows what's going to happen. But I imagine Kirk Cousins will be back this year. And I'm thinking that the Vikings will try to also look forward to the future. And maybe it's draft a quarterback. They have to fall in love with somebody that's not going to be probably a top 5 pick. A lot of people have Tua going to the Dolphins at number 5. And obviously, there's Justin Herbert, which might be around a little bit later in the first round. But I don't see the Vikings using a first rounder on a quarterback. If they love somebody in the second or third, I can see them taking that risk.
So is it reasonable at all? This would be my question pertaining to this group of scenarios authored by Bill Barnwell of ESPN. Is it reasonable to even discuss the idea of Cousins being traded? And I'll give you the reason I think it would be is that you look at what the Boston Red Sox just did with Mookie Betts and trading him away. Of course, Boston is burning to the ground over this because he's a great player. But the Red Sox are saying, yeah, we could keep you for one more year and let you just hit the free agent market and make $400 million for somebody else. Or we could get something back and then replace you with whatever else we can get our hands on. They do this in hockey all the time, too, where when somebody is going into the final year of their contract, they're probably getting traded if you don't sign them to an extension right away. It's not often, unless it's a winning team, that they run somebody right to the end of their contract, unless you can win a Stanley Cup at that moment. If the Vikings looked at it as, we think we're going to make a different move here, we're going to draft somebody, or we're going to get another quarterback, or we like some of the options, then from that perspective, it would make sense to not run it all the way to the very end and have him be the lame duck quarterback to look for trades. But that's the only way I can sort of finagle it. I think
you see this as it's like a game of risk, right? Like if you don't take a risk in this scenario for this franchise to upgrade, to find, one of these guys that's like the guy, even if it's you sort of get lucky with a late first rounder or a second rounder that ends up being a great player, because they sort of know what they have. Do they take that risk, which could be a disaster, could get people fired, but also, without taking any risks, you never have a reward. And the question is, how far do they think Kirk Cousins can bring them? And if it's not a Super Bowl, there's no point. I don't want a quarterback he's good at getting the team just around the playoff hunt.
Right.
It's not going to get it done. Who at 9-7, 10-6, 8-8, that's okay. But I'm trying to win a Super Bowl here, and you have to take some risks. And back in the day, And the Chargers, since we're talking about it, they did this. They liked Drew Brees, but they didn't love him, and they had a terrible season. I think they were 4-12, and then they went out and they drafted Phillip Rivers. Now Brees came back the next year. He had a pretty good season, so they had to keep him another year. Then he got hurt. He hurt his shoulder in a week 17. Yeah, I think they're like 9-7. And then boom, it was Phillip Rivers from then on out. And of course, Brees ended up having this Hall of Fame career. So, but they were looking for something. They thought that Drew can't get us to that level. Here's the guy we just love. Let's make that take that risk. And every scenario is different. And I don't want to compare Drew Brees to Kirk Cousins. I think they're not the same player, obviously. But does the team want to have some risk in this thing where it could end up being a disaster and they win 4 or 5 games because they go out and they decide we're going to try to hit a home run, and sometimes you hit home runs, you strike out, but other times you connect, and then you got your guy for the next 12 years. And I believe the Vikings are still looking for who that guy is.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. If they've seen the last 2 years and looked at it through just very, black and white eyes, they probably saw a guy who reached the best levels of his career and only could get them to 10 wins. And that's going to be almost impossible to go all the way through the playoffs with a quarterback who's more or less 500 as a starter for his career. If you have to go and play in the wild card round and then play in the divisional round and go on the road, it just doesn't happen very often. And it hasn't happened almost at all in the last decade for a team to not have a home playoff game and go win. And that's kind of what you'd be signing yourself up for long term if you sign Cousins to an extension. I imagine there's a lot of people at CCO Performance Center saying we have to draft a quarterback this year. We have to look for what you're saying, that special person we could turn it over to. But to the question that I originally asked about trading him this year, that's where I can't make a whole lot of sense of it, because the Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes route makes way more sense. Draft a quarterback, have him sit for a year, go for it again with Kirk Cousins, and then turn the ball over to that guy. That makes more sense to me than trade him right now and then bring in another quarterback. But also, Sage, this is a very weird year. This is not your usual, hey, there's no free agent quarterbacks, right? I mean,
super strange year. It's also, I was thinking about this with just the NFL quarterbacks in general. You have like all these guys who are 35 plus. There's Brees and Brady and Rivers and Roethlisberger. Aaron Rodgers is getting up there. There's all these like older guys who are sort of in the end of their career. And then we have all these awesome young guys who are in the first 4 years of their career. And like, wow, these guys are the future of the league. You could throw Carson Wentz in that mix. I don't know, it's year 5 maybe or something like that. But, Deshaun Watson and Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. It's like there's not a lot in the middle. It's like there is a drought for like 8 years where there's a couple of guys. Russell Wilson probably be in that mix, but there wasn't a whole bunch of quarterbacks that are sort of in their 30 years old right now who are great players. And that's sort of where Kirk is. He's sort of in that mix of that time and era where there's not a ton of guys with some experience that have played really, really well and whatever. So I just am trying to figure out who would be the team that would trade for Cousins. If somebody would and give up legitimate value for him, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Vikings to go, you know what, let's get something for him. We don't want to sign some sort of future deal. It's going to cost us minimum 25, probably closer to $30 million a year. He's not going to be the guy that's going to bring us over to the top and we can put the sort of the team on his shoulders. And, the value of those cap dollars are important, and just, and sort of take a risk and go like, we've decided that, he's good, but we need great. And it really does help to have great to get to the Super Bowl, helps to have great to win 12 or 13 or 14 games, which is pretty much what you need. It seems to me to be a, 1 or 2 seed, which is a huge help to get to the championship game. So I think if someone were to have some interest in trading for him, that the Vikings should be, very interested in listening to those offers. I just don't see who and what those offers would be.
If we're getting outrageously reckless in our speculation and going team to team, trying to find somebody that would trade draft assets for Kirk Cousins and his contract and presumably sign him to a new contract, though they wouldn't have to. And that's where this does kind of become interesting if you're another team that's in a bit of a win now mode, but you've got a problem at the quarterback situation. Trading him to the Bears seems extremely unlikely because it's within your division, and that usually doesn't happen. But the Los Angeles answer is the most interesting because they're opening the new stadium, because they have no quarterback right
Do
now
you think
outside of
Cousins
Tyrod
is
Taylor.
a splash player for them? I just don't. I see Drew Brees as a splash player for them, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I see, a big name or at least exciting a play. Some of the guy that comes in, he's like a playmaker. At least he's fun to watch. But people in the seats. How about this one? You know who comes from the tree? Zach Taylor, the Bengals head coach. If we go really speculation, get out there. How about they trade that first pick of the draft, or they get, so Joe Burrow goes somewhere else, but they get Chase Young, who is probably the best player actually in the draft. He's just not a quarterback. He's a defensive end from Ohio State. They can still get him. They can trade whatever, for that first pick, and then they can give up, a fourth rounder and just have Kirk Cousins, be their guy or something like that. So they sort of have the quarterback and they get the player they actually want, and they could probably get, 2 first-round picks or something, or whatever, just to move back maybe a spot, right? I mean, I don't know. There's just some interesting aspects of this whole thing that, we'll see how it plays out. It would have to be a team that really just has an affinity for Kirk and maybe some history that they, more than other people, go, this guy, we actually think he's been underused, whether it's in Minnesota and Washington, and they think they can get more value out of him.
Okay, I've got a couple other ones that are sort of possibilities. How about the Vegas Raiders? Derek Carr does not seem like he's staying with Vegas. John Gruden, the moment he got there, probably decided he wants the quarterback decision to be his decision, and he's kind of tight with Kirk Cousins. Maybe his brother and Kirk didn't get along at the end of Kirk's time in DC, but he goes and works out with John Gruden, I think in the offseason, or those two get together at different times. You could see that if they decided themselves to trade Derek Carr somewhere. Let's say they trade Derek Carr to Chicago, then they need a quarterback. I mean, the possibilities are endless. Field Yates tweeted this out not too long ago, the ESPN reporter, that the quarterbacks who are scheduled to become free agents in March includes like Ryan Tannehill, Jameis Winston, even Dak Prescott. We don't know what they're going to do with Dak Prescott. And there was another rumor started by Michael Irvin that he talked to people that think that Dallas wants Tom Brady. And this thing could get super, super wild. So we might not even realize what teams could be looking for quarterbacks. Even the Tennessee Titans, we don't know what their plan would be. If they don't think that Ryan Tannehill is going to repeat what he did last year and they want someone more proven to go forward with, we don't know what the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to do. Gardner Minshew's probably not going to start there. And Nick Foles already got benched last year. So are you going to go back to him? There's so many openings here that I think all possibilities are worth at least having fun discussing.
And this is what I love about the NFL offseason is that, I mean, football is done. The XFL is going on. That's another discussion that we're going to get to later in the show. But the way they schedule things and the way like it almost creates speculation and creates what could happen. I mean, there's all this talk right now. Well, it's nice that right before free agency starts, when a lot of these dominoes will start to fall, or maybe even the week leading up to it, there's also the NFL Combine. And there's going to be these quarterbacks out there, and they're going to be throwing, yes. And so teams will have a chance to be up close and personal with these college guys and go, okay, well, we got this guy we really like, but then there's this guy who's a free agent, and there's this veteran guy, and maybe we could combo the. I mean, there's all that goes into it, and that's like about a week from each other, from when free agency starts and all the combine, the throwing, on that Thursday when we're going to be there, which I'm really looking forward to. Yes. So this is going to be a super interesting offseason for quarterbacks. I sort of think this is the first major story, I guess. There's going to be other ones. There's a decent chance, again, I think there's a decent chance that it's not all that exciting. Like Breeze just ends up back with the Saints and Dak ends up with the Cowboys and, and Brady ends up with the Patriots. Or it could get really interesting, but we definitely have not had many off seasons like this as far as NFL veteran quarterback free agents.
If you are Phillip Rivers, who are you telling your agent to bother the most? Like, what team are you saying to your agent, hey, why don't you just call them and see what their situation is at quarterback? Because 1 year with team blank might be pretty good for me. Who would that be if you were Phillip Rivers?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I do know this. I mean, his family, it sounds like they're all in Florida. So that's where I've said this. I think I said this last week that Tampa just sort of seems to make a lot of sense because of that situation, or Miami. Both those teams, looking for a long-term or short or long-term answer. No one knows what Jacksonville is going to do. So all three Florida football teams would be interested just for, because how Phillip Rivers just is, right? I mean, is he really, is that more important to him, sort of being close to home, or is it like, put me on a team that, gives, that I could give them a great chance to be successful? Oh, wait, that's the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yes.
Way out there, and his family's over there. I don't, he doesn't need the money, obviously. And how does he want to have that lifestyle? So there's actually weird aspects to what Rivers' decision is. But as far as like what's best, has the best chance to be successful, that, as things are a little bit up in the, I mean, Dallas, I think, is a great spot to be in. That's a really good football team. I'm interested to see what the new coaches do there or whatever, but that's a good team. And I think that, that's also obviously a huge market, the Jerry Dome and playing indoors and all those things. But, I don't know. What are your thoughts on where, if you were Phillip Rivers, where you'd want to end up?
If he wants to play again this year, I'm calling my old buddy Frank Reich in Indianapolis and saying, come on, man, let's go. You guys aren't sticking with Jacoby Brissett, are you? And for the Colts, it would make a lot of sense for them even to draft a second round quarterback or something and have a quarterback like Phillip Rivers play for a year, try to win with a team that's really good, that has an excellent offensive line, that could draft some more playmakers, a ton of cap space to sign a receiver, to boost up their defense a little bit more. And in a division that's not that impressive, the Jaguars, the Texans, the Titans.
Yeah, one of the weaker. That's like the 9-7 division.
Yes.
It seems like, right? It's like that's the division that goes out of the playoffs after one round or whatever it's going to be, and like one team gets in. So that division, definitely, it always helps when you have like a super weak division. Who wants to play in the NFC West right now?
Right.
That division's a nightmare.
Right.
We'll see where he ends up. Obviously, I think he's a free agent and he can just sign anytime. He does not have to wait until free agency begins, which is, maybe that was just sort of a nice thing that the Chargers did, maybe for Phillip, so he can have a little bit extra time, 3 weeks or so to get ready for this free agency period.